Picture a soundstage at Paramount Pictures, stage 12, to be exact, on a cold Tuesday morning in October 1968. The overhead arc lights have just been switched on, flooding the set in that particular white-blue wash that makes everything look both sharp and slightly unreal. 114 people are standing still. Grips with their hands on equipment, they aren't moving. A script supervisor with her pencil frozen above her notepad. A camera operator with his eye pressed against the viewfinder, not rolling, just watching. At the center of that stillness stands a man who is 61 years old. He weighs 223 pounds. He stands 6 feet 4 inches in flat-soled boots, not the elevated heels that some actors quietly request. His face carries 23 years of deep desert sunlight, 23 years of riding real horses on real terrain in temperatures that ranged from below zero in Wyoming to 114 degrees in Monument Valley. The lines around his eyes aren't cosmetic. Neither is the set of his jaw. He has just been handed a note. Not from a director. Not from a producer. From a studio executive who isn't on set that morning. A man who sent the message through an intermediary, which tells you something about the courage of the man who sent it. The note says he is too old. The note says the audience has moved on. The note says that what the studio needs now is fire, speed, and youth. And that John Wayne, at 61, can no longer deliver what the camera demands. He reads the note once, folds it, places it in the front pocket of his denim work shirt. Then he looks up at the camera. And what happened in the next 4 hours on that soundstage, what he did in take after take, in scene after scene, in front of those 114 witnesses, is the reason that note was never sent again. This is that story. To understand what was happening on stage 12 that October morning, you have to understand where Hollywood was in 1968. Not metaphorically, precisely. Cinematically, industrially, and commercially. The old studio system that had built John Wayne's career across 4 decades was in the middle of the most violent transformation it had ever experienced. The production code, which had governed what American films could show and say since 1930, had been dismantled that very year, replaced by the new MPAA rating system. Suddenly, films could be raw in ways they had never been permitted to be. Blood was visible. Moral ambiguity was not just allowed but celebrated. Arthur Penn had released Bonnie and Clyde 12 months earlier, and the movie had changed everything. Not because it was violent, but because its violence meant something different from the violence in any Western John Wayne had ever made. It was ironic. It was self-aware. It pointed back at the audience and said, "You built this mythology, and now look at what it costs." That film earned $70 million. It had cost $2. $5 million to make. At the same time, The Graduate, released in December of 1967, had demonstrated that young audiences would pay enthusiastically to watch films that had nothing to do with the landscape of classic Hollywood heroism. Dustin Hoffman was 5 feet 7 inches tall. He wore rumpled clothes. He was confused, passive, and uncertain. And audiences across America between the ages of 18 and 25 went back to see that film 2, 3, 4 times. It grossed $104 million on a budget of $3 million. The studio arithmetic was not subtle. Young audiences were demonstrating, loudly, financially, that they did not necessarily want what John Wayne represented. He was aware of this. He was not a man who avoided uncomfortable information. But the film on the table in October 1968 was True Grit. The role was U.S. Marshall Reuben J. Rooster Cogburn, a one-eyed, whiskey-soaked, morally compromised lawman hired by a 14-year-old girl named Maddie Ross to track down her father's killer. It was not a heroic character in the clean sense that Wayne had built his career on. Rooster Cogburn drank too much. He made bad decisions. He was past his physical prime, and he knew it. And the film's entire emotional architecture rested on whether audiences would believe, in their bones, that this broken, aging man still had something real left in him when it counted. Hal Wallis was the producer. His credits ran to 91 films over 35 years, including Casablanca, Yankee Doodle Dandy, and Beckett. He was not a sentimental man. He was also not a fool. He had wanted Wayne for this role with a specific intention. He believed that only a man who had actually lived the accumulated weight of decades could make Rooster Cogburn true. But Paramount's distribution division had a different red. The executive in question, a man who had joined the studio's commercial analysis department in 1964 and who dealt primarily in demographic projections and theater chain negotiations, had reviewed the box office trends and generated a recommendation that landed on Wallis's desk in early October. The memo was 4 pages long. Its argument was precise and, if you accepted its premises entirely, not unreasonable. It cited the trajectory of Wayne's last 5 films. It noted that The War Wagon, released in 1967, had opened at $1.8 million in its first weekend, down 22% from El Dorado's 1967 opening weekend. It cited audience surveys from 1966 and 1967 that showed declining strong preference ratings for Wayne among viewers under 35. The conclusion the memo reached was that casting John Wayne as Rooster Cogburn, a physically demanding role requiring horseback sequences, gunfight choreography, and sustained emotional presence across a 128-minute runtime, represented a commercial risk that could be substantially reduced by recasting with a younger actor. The names suggested were Lee Marvin, who was 44, George C. Scott, who was 42, and one other name, which we'll come back to. That memo became the note. And the note, distilled to its essential message, said, "You are too old." The executive did not deliver this note himself. He was not on set. He had not been on set for any of the previous 14 days of shooting. The intermediary who delivered it, a junior production coordinator named Thomas Breck, 27 years old, who had been at the studio for 18 months, handed the folded note to Wayne between setups at approximately 8:47 in the morning, and then took 3 very deliberate steps backward. But here's where it changes. Because John Wayne did not respond the way the executive expected him to respond. He did not call Wallis. He did not demand a meeting. He did not raise his voice on a set where 114 people were working within earshot. He did what he always did when something important had been placed in front of him. He went to work. Director Henry Hathaway had been watching Wayne on sets since 1940. He directed him in Shepherd of the Hills that year and had worked with him again on Legend of the Lost in 1957. By October 1968, he had 28 years of direct professional observation of this man. He knew what Wayne looked like when he was performing. He also knew, and this was a rarer piece of knowledge, what Wayne looked like when he was doing something else entirely. What Hathaway saw that morning, after the note was delivered, was the second thing. Wayne walked back onto the set. The scene on the schedule was Rooster Cogburn's introduction. The sequence in which Maddie Ross first encounters the marshal and sizes him up, trying to determine whether this unpromising wreck of a man has what she needs. It was a dialogue-heavy scene. There was no action choreography. It required, above everything else, the ability to fill a frame with the unmistakable presence of a man who has been somewhere and done things, who carries that history not in what he says, but in the specific gravity of how he occupies space. Hathaway later described what he observed in a 1972 interview with film historian Joseph McBride. He said, "Duke walked onto that set, and there was something different about him. He wasn't acting Rooster. He was settling into him, like a man putting on a coat he's owned for 40 years. The costume department had dressed Wayne in Rooster's gear for the first time that morning. The weathered cavalry coat, the black patch over the left eye, the battered, trail-used hat. His hands, and this is the detail that multiple crew members mentioned separately in accounts gathered over the following decade. His hands looked different in that costume. Not larger. They were already large, with a grip measurement that his stunt coordinator, Chuck Roberson, once measured at 9.2 inches palm width. What changed was how he used them. He was not placing his hands where an actor places his hands. He was using them the way a man who had actually spent 30 years working rough country would use them. As tools, as instruments of practical purpose, at rest only when rest was the right choice, moving only when movement served a function. He stood at his mark. He read the note again, very briefly, inside his coat. Then he put it away for the last time. The first camera was ready. Hathaway called for quiet. The set settled. Wayne looked at the 14-year-old actress across from him, Kim Darby, playing Maddie Ross. And in the quality of that look, something that had been theoretical about this film became concrete. What happened next, nobody expected. Not the magnitude of it. Not the specific, undeniable weight of it. A 6'4", 220-pound man in a cavalry coat looked at a small girl across 12 feet of soundstage floor, and in the silence before Hathaway called action, Thomas Breck, the young coordinator who had delivered the note, was heard to say under his breath, to no one in particular, "Oh, just that." The note had not been a private communication. Production politics in Hollywood in 1968 did not work in private. particularly on a Paramount lot where the old and new Hollywood factions were in visible daily conflict. By the time Wayne had absorbed the note's contents and walked back to his mark, 14 people on that stage knew its general substance. By the lunch break, the number was closer to 40. The executive who had sent it had anticipated a negotiation, a meeting, possibly a publicized recasting. The kind of story that, handled correctly, could reframe a commercial decision as an artistic evolution. What he had not anticipated was being ignored. That is not a small thing to a man who deals in leverage. Paramount's distribution apparatus in 1968 was the final authority on what films got wide releases, what films got limited engagements, and what films were quietly shelved in the post-production stage. The executive's department controlled those decisions. His memo had not been a casual opinion. It had been, in the specific language of studio hierarchy, a flag, and when a flag is planted, it expects acknowledgement. Wayne gave him none. The assistant director, a veteran named Mickey McCardle who had worked on 23 pictures, recalled in a 1974 oral history that the set atmosphere that morning was unusual in a specific way. Not tense in the conventional sense. Not the tight, brittle tension of a difficult shoot or a personality conflict. Something quieter and more charged. He described it as the way a room feels just before someone says something that can't be unsaid. Except nobody was saying it. Duke was just working. Hathaway had received a copy of the memo the same morning. He had read it at 6:15 a.m. in his car before arriving on set. His response had been to say nothing to Wayne about it and to change the shooting order. The scene originally scheduled first that morning had been a relatively simple walk and talk. Hathaway pulled it from the schedule and replaced it with the most demanding scene on that day's call sheet. The courthouse step sequence, in which Rooster delivers a 3-minute monologue to Matty Ross explaining his professional record, his kills, his methods, his failures, while Hathaway held on a continuous close-up, no cuts, no relief. This was a director making a statement with his schedule. It was also a director applying pressure. A 3-minute, no-cut close-up is among the most unforgiving tools in a filmmaker's arsenal. There is no editing rhythm to help. There is no cutaway to break the audience's gaze. The camera is 2 feet from the actor's face for 180 consecutive seconds, and either the truth is there or it is not. Either the accumulated weight of a life is present in the eyes, the jaw, the hands, the breath, or it is absent. And if it is absent, the footage will show it with a precision that no amount of post-production can correct. Hathaway called rehearsal at 9:15. A production coordinator, not Breck, a different one, quietly approached Hathaway between the rehearsal setup and the first take and suggested, on behalf of a party she did not name, that it might be worth considering whether the no-cut approach placed unnecessary pressure on principal talent. This was the defusing attempt. Politely framed. Professionally delivered. A diplomatic opening for someone to step back from a position without losing face. Hathaway looked at her for 4 seconds. Then he said, "Roll camera." Wayne was standing at his mark. He did not look at the production coordinator. He did not look at Hathaway. He was looking at Kim Darby, across the specific distance that Rooster Cogburn would have looked at Matty Ross. Not with warmth exactly, not with impatience, but with the particular quality of attention that a man gives a situation he is deciding about. The room went quiet. Not gradually. All at once. And inside John Wayne's stillness, the decision had already been made. In the first second after Hathaway called action, nothing happened. That sounds like an absence. It was not. In film, the nothing that precedes a performance is part of the performance. Hathaway knew this, his camera operator knew this, and every grip and gaffer on that stage who had worked more than 10 pictures knew this. The nothing John Wayne inhabited in that first second was not a pause. It was a man locating something inside himself that had taken 61 years to accumulate. In the second, his weight shifted. It was a movement of perhaps 2 inches. A slight forward lean from the hips, not the shoulders, the way a man shifts when he is about to commit to a decision. Rooster Cogburn's posture. Not a posture Wayne was assuming. A posture Wayne was inhabiting from the inside out. The way you can only inhabit something after you have carried a version of it your entire adult life. By the 3rd second, he had begun to speak. The monologue ran 172 words. Hathaway had timed it in rehearsal at 3 minutes and 8 seconds at the pace he wanted. Wayne delivered it in 3 minutes and 4 seconds. He did not rush it. He did not slow it for effect. He found the pace the way a river finds its grade. Not by force, but by the natural movement of something that knows where it is going. What those 114 people witnessed in the following 3 minutes was something that resists simple description, which is why so many of them tried to describe it independently over the following decade and kept arriving at the same essential point from different directions. Mickey McCardle said, "He wasn't performing a character. He was reporting a fact." Second camera operator David Knoll said, "I've been on sets since 1951. I know the difference between an actor hitting his marks and an actor being somewhere. Duke was somewhere." Costume supervisor Edith Head, who had dressed Wayne on 4 previous productions and who was present on stage 12 for a fitting consultation, said simply, "He didn't move the way other men moved. Not that morning. Here is what they were observing, with the precision the evidence demands." The monologue required Wayne to cover 4 distinct emotional registers in sequence: dismissal, professional pride, self-awareness of failure, and the specific kind of stubbornness that refuses to be diminished by its own failures. In lesser hands, and there would have been lesser hands if the executives' suggested recastings had been pursued, those 4 registers would have been transitions, visible shifts in the performance gear. The audience would have watched an actor move from one state to another. Wayne did not move between states. He held all 4 simultaneously, the way a man who has actually lived through enough of his own history carries all of it at once without choosing which part to show. The dismissal was present in the set of his jaw. The professional pride was present in the specific, undefended directness of his gaze. The self-awareness was present in a quality of his voice that could not have been manufactured, a slight roughness in the mid-range frequencies that was not put there by acting technique. And the stubbornness, the irreducible stubbornness of a man who has been knocked down and gotten up enough times to know that getting up is simply what you do, was present in the way he stood. At the 1-minute 40-second mark, the room went completely still. Not the polite, professional quiet of a working set observing a take. Something different. The kind of stillness that happens when a group of people who have all seen many things are seeing something they don't have a prepared category for. Thomas Breck, the 27-year-old coordinator who had delivered the note, was standing near the west wall of the stage. He had crossed his arms at some point during the first minute. By the 90-second mark, his arms had uncrossed. He was not taking notes. He was not consulting his schedule clipboard. He was watching. At 2 minutes and 12 seconds, Kim Darby, who was professionally accomplished, who had been prepared, who knew her craft, made a micro-adjustment in her expression that was entirely spontaneous and entirely correct for the scene. It was the expression of a character who has just realized that what she has hired is not what she thought she was hiring, that this broken, aging man contains something she had not budgeted for. Hathaway did not tell her to do this. Nobody told her to do this. It happened because of what was coming at her across those 12 feet of soundstage floor. That's not an actor responding to another actor's technique. That's a person responding to a presence. The physical consequence came at 2 minutes and 41 seconds. Wayne reached the section of the monologue where Rooster lists the men he has killed in the course of his service. 5 men, named with circumstances. He did not raise his voice. He did not lower it. He held the exact same tone he had been using since the second, and he listed those 5 names with the specific, neither proud nor ashamed directness of a man who has made his accounting and is not asking for a verdict. In the silence after the 5th name, 3 seconds of complete, acoustically total silence fell on stage 12. Then Hathaway said, very quietly, "Cut." He did not say anything else. He walked from behind the camera. He walked across the stage floor. He stopped 6 feet from Wayne and looked at him for approximately 4 seconds. Then he nodded once, a single, short, definitive nod, and turned back toward the camera. "Print it," he said. "Set for the next setup." That was the moment. Not a dramatic declaration. Not a confrontation resolved in raised voices or physical demonstration. A 4-second look and 1 nod from a director who had been watching actors since before most of the people on that stage had been born. Wayne stepped back from his mark. He reached into his denim work shirt pocket. He did not take out the note. He took out a small, battered pocket calendar, the kind that working men carried in the 1960s, with a leather cover soft from years of handling, opened it to that week, and made a notation. What the notation said, nobody on set could see. He stepped back, further than he needed to, past the edge of the light. Not retreating. Choosing not to continue past the necessary point. He always did that. Hal Wallis was not on stage 12 that morning. He was in his offices in the main production building, approximately 340 feet from the soundstage, reviewing dailies from the previous week's shooting on a different project. He received a phone call from Hathaway at 11:43 a.m. The call lasted 7 minutes. What was said in those 7 minutes was reconstructed partly from Wallis's 1980 memoir Starmaker, and partly from a subsequent conversation Wallis had with journalist Peter Bart, published in Variety in 1972. The reconstruction is not complete, but its essential shape is clear. Hathaway told Wallis, "You need to see this afternoon's dailies before anyone from distribution sees them. Not after. Before." Wallis asked why. Hathaway said, "Because the conversation is going to be different after." Wallis arranged to have the dailies screened at 4:30 that afternoon in Projection Room 3. Present at the screening were Wallis, Hathaway, and notably, the executive who had sent the note. He had been invited by Wallis directly. He was not told why. The screening lasted 41 minutes. The 3-minute courthouse steps take was the third reel shown. The executive did not speak during the screening. After the lights came up, Wallis looked at him and waited. This is a producer's particular skill, the patience to let a silence work for you. After approximately 30 seconds, the executive said, "All right." That was the totality of his response. 2 words. Not a reversal of his professional analysis. Not a formal retraction of his memo, but an acknowledgement, specific, private, delivered in the specific language of men who deal in professional realities, that what he had assessed from demographic projections and box office trajectories was not, in fact, the whole picture. The meeting between Wayne and Wallis that evening was private. It took place in Wallis's office at 6:15 p.m. According to Wallis's memoir, Wayne arrived in the same denim work shirt he'd worn on set, having declined the offer of the studio car to take him home and back. He had simply stayed. Wallis poured 2 glasses of bourbon from the bottle he kept in the lower right drawer of his desk, a fact corroborated by his assistant Dorothy Klinger's notes from that period, which confirmed that the bourbon was Old Fitzgerald, and that Wallis poured it for 3 people in his entire professional career. Wayne sat in the chair across from the desk, not the sofa against the wall where visitors typically sat. Wallis said, "You knew they wanted to recast you." Wayne said, "I knew someone did." Then he said something that Wallis quoted verbatim in Starmaker, which is the reason it survived. "The part's not about what I can still do, Hal. It's about what Rooster knows he can't do anymore, and does anyway. You can't fake that knowledge. You have to have earned it." Wallis set down his glass. He picked up the executive's 4-page memo from his desk. He had brought it to the meeting, and he folded it in half, once, and placed it in the side drawer. Then he extended his hand across the desk. Wayne shook it. Once. Firmly. The way men of that generation sealed decisions that didn't require paperwork. "We finished the film," Wallis said. "We finished the film," Wayne said. "That's not a compromise. That's a principle, recognized by 2 men in a room, spoken at the same time." Years later, specifically in March of 1970, John Wayne stood on the stage of the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion in Los Angeles and accepted the Academy Award for Best Actor for his performance as Rooster Cogburn in True Grit. He was the oldest leading actor to win in that category since 1934. He held the Oscar in his right hand, and the hand was steady, and the audience of 2,000 people in that auditorium. Many of them the same industry figures who had watched Bonnie and Clyde and The Graduate and concluded that the old heroism was finished, gave him a standing ovation that lasted 3 minutes and 40 seconds. The executive whose memo had argued for recasting had, by that point, moved into a different role within the distribution division. He was not in the auditorium that night, but he watched the broadcast. He said so, years afterward, in a brief interview included in a 1981 documentary about Hal Wallis's career. He was asked what he remembered about the Wayne casting decision. He said, "I remember being wrong about what the data meant. I could read the numbers. I couldn't read the man." That's not a small admission. That is a professional, reviewing the gap between what he knew how to measure and what turned out to matter. Thomas Breck, the 27-year-old production coordinator who had delivered the note and then stood against the west wall of stage 12 watching Wayne work, did not stay in coordination work. By 1972, he had transitioned into development, reading scripts, evaluating material, learning to assess what a piece of writing had in its bones versus what it had on its surface. He spent 31 years in that work. He later told an interviewer that the single most clarifying professional experience of his career was watching a 61-year-old man in a cavalry coat make a room go silent with the specific weight of what he had actually lived through. "I stopped asking whether an actor could do the part," Breck said. "I started asking whether the part was asking for something the actor already knew." The lesson moved forward. It always does. Kim Darby, who was 19 years old when she stood 12 feet from John Wayne on stage 12 and made that spontaneous micro-adjustment in her expression, that genuine response to a genuine presence, carried something from that experience into every production she worked on afterward. In a 1977 interview, she said, "There are performers who make you act at them, and there are performers who make you be real with them. Duke made you real." Return now to stage 12. October 1968. That cold Tuesday morning with the arc lights up and 114 people standing still. A note said a man was too old. The note was wrong, not because age was irrelevant to the question, but because it was asking about the wrong thing. The question was never what Wayne could still physically do. The question was what he had earned the right to understand. At 61, with 142 films in his career and more genuine Western geography in his working body than any demographic projection could measure, he understood Rooster Cogburn from the inside. He understood a man who was past his best days and did the necessary thing anyway, not despite knowing his limitations, but because of knowing them precisely. That is not youth. That cannot be purchased with youth. One note, one stage, one truth that the numbers had no column for. John Wayne did not prove the studio executive wrong by arguing with him. He proved him wrong by going to work. He did not explain what he was capable of. He demonstrated it for 114 witnesses in 3 minutes and 4 seconds on a cold Tuesday morning when the world had already decided what he was. Some lessons take a career to earn. Some are delivered in 3 minutes. Some last long after the man who delivered them is gone. But there was one confrontation from this same production, something that happened 3 weeks later in the desert outside Ouray, Colorado, during the film's most physically demanding exterior sequence, that John Wayne never discussed publicly. Not in any interview. Not in any memoir. Not in any of the oral histories gathered in the decade after his death. What happened out there, and why he chose to keep it to himself, that's a story for another time.